So I will start off slower. This is for me a wonderful opportunity, and I am grateful to have this. And also the fact that you have come out tonight. I respect your time, and I want to make it worthwhile, especially since you made the choice to come here instead of Halloween. And so I'm very grateful for that. Now, I am 65 years old, so vanity is not so much anymore. So I'm going to wear my glasses so I know what I'm looking at. I will spend about half of the time speaking to you, because I want to save half of the time for your questions, your challenges, pushback. It helps me every time when I get hard questions from an audience or from individuals, because it forces me to rethink my assumptions. I always learn things. It happens every day. And so for me, this is a great opportunity, and I will welcome that. Now, of course, things happened on October 7th that changed my entire plan for what I was going to do tonight. It was going to be, as you can see from the title, it was mostly Ukraine-focused. What does that mean for us? And then the world changed on October 7th with a terrible attack by Hamas against innocent people in Israel. And so I was not even agile enough to recommend a change to the title. So if it seems a little bit jerky over the next 30, 40 minutes, I apologize for that, because I can't keep up with time. Like most of you, I have learned or relearned a lot about the history of the Holy Land, the geography of Israel, who the Palestinians are. I think we've all been reading a lot lately, trying to figure out how did we get where we are now. And certainly many American presidents have tried to help solve the issues confronting the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Middle East region, and with mixed success, but yet here we are today in a worse place than we were on October the 6th. So what does come next? How do we prevent this from becoming even worse? So that's part of what I want to address. I think it's important that we put this in a global context. I believe that what happened in Israel, the attack by Hamas, is not an isolated incident. It is not a coincidence. The fact that the supporter of Hamas, which is Iran, is also the most important ally of Russia. Who benefits the most from the Hamas attack on Israel? Not Hamas. Thousands of Hamas warriors are going to be killed. Thousands of them. Their infrastructure in Gaza is going to be smashed. So who benefits the most from this? Obviously, it's Russia. You would have a hard time finding any newspaper that had anything about Ukraine on the front page or page 2 or page 3. The Hamas attack on Israel has taken everybody's attention, including the U.S. government, my president, our Congress. All the attention is on Israel. So I think that what is happening is a coordinated effort between the Kremlin and Tehran to put pressure on the West to cause as many problems as possible so that we cannot pay attention to what Russia is doing in so many places, and so that we are also not able to effectively respond to what is happening in so many places. We're being tested. And of course, in the background, on the other side of the world, China is watching. The Chinese are waiting to see, is the United States, is the West, are we capable of helping Ukraine defeat Russia, helping Israel defeat Hamas, put pressure on Israel to protect 2 million innocent Palestinians, prevent Iran from attacking their neighbors and American bases in Iraq and Syria? Are we capable of doing all of that? And at the same time, do we have enough capability and capacity to tell the Chinese, do not think that you could attack Taiwan now, or that you could attack the Philippines, or seize or stake a claim in the South China Sea. So all of these things are happening at the same time. So we have to ask, are we prepared in the West? Are we organized in the West to have a strategy to address all of these threats from an economic standpoint and a diplomatic standpoint, not only from a military standpoint? I think my president, President Biden, has set out to do this, approach this from a global perspective. As you know, the package of aid for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and our borders, he has put them forward together in one package because of the need to approach this from a strategically as parts of one whole. But of course, all of you are watching, I imagine you're watching what's going on in the U.S. with our own domestic political situation. It's not unique to America, but it has significant impact on these crises that I'm talking about. We have a new Speaker of the House, finally. I have to be honest, I had no idea who he was until he became the most powerful congressman in Washington, D.C. Even Senator McConnell, who is the majority, or the Republican leader of the Senate, he didn't know who he was. But that's now his conversation partner. But that's part of, I mean, probably most of you have spent time in the U.S. either on a holiday or school or work or something. You know that there's always a normal degree of chaos that's going on. Right now seems a little bit more so. But you can sit at home and whine about it, or you can do something about it. And certainly that's what I intend to do, is to do all I can in the coming year to make sure that we have we protect our liberal democratic values in the United States, that we build respect for our institutions of the Congress, the media, the court system, the executive office, to make sure that these are strong. This is what autocratic nations like Russia, China, Iran, they hate that. They hate the so-called international rules-based order from which we have all benefited. They hate that. But this is what's at stake in Ukraine, Israel, and other places. But unless you're a political scientist, when you hear international rules-based order, like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, what is the international rules-based order? Of course, it's the set of treaties and agreements and laws that were agreed after the Second World War, including the UN Charter, including laws of armed conflict, including law of the sea, including the Rome Statutes, which created the criminal court. These are all part of the rules-based order. So what's at stake is sovereignty, respect for sovereignty, respect for borders, respect for human rights, respect for freedom of navigation. Everybody in this auditorium has something in your home that came to Switzerland from another country. It had to come by ship, probably, if you have anything from China. Or if you're a German and your economy is based on exporting cars somewhere else, freedom of navigation is not some arcane academic thing. It's what enables our economies to do what they do. That's what's at stake with Russia's constant disruption of freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, or China's challenging freedom of navigation in the Pacific. These are the kind of things that are at stake. Respect for international agreements, respect for international law. So what I see is Russia and Iran working together, trying to create as many pressure points as possible for the West. Disinformation is out there. I know each of you probably sees it every day. It's amazing how fast fake news, false news, bad news can get around the world. The example is the hospital that was struck in Gaza. I mean, in minutes, the whole world was talking about this Israeli strike that destroyed a hospital and killed 500 people. Of course, it turns out that's not what happened, but it doesn't matter because it got around the world so fast. And so all of us have to compete in this information domain. Now, the U.S., we are getting organized. My president from day one, and by the way, I'm not even a Democrat, I'm not a spokesman for the Biden White House, but he is my president, and I am proud of what he is trying to do. He set out on day one, on his inauguration speech, talking about allies, the importance of allies. And he began to work to repair the damage that had been done in the previous administration to our relations with particularly European countries. Because the president understood not only is American security tied to NATO, American prosperity is tied to the European Union. And so to reestablish those relationships with our European allies and partners has been a priority for him. Another part of getting organized, of course, is defense industry. For 20 years, our defense industry was producing equipment, ammunition, things that were needed for Afghanistan or Iraq. Today, the Ukrainian army shoots as much artillery in a week as we spent in 20 years in Afghanistan. So this has been a dramatic change in the demand signal for even basic things like artillery ammunition. And of course, there's been a lot of pressure from different governments. You know, industry's got to do more. You've got to increase production. All right? These are not charities. They have thousands of employees, very sophisticated supply chains. And so if you want to increase the production of ammunition or tanks or air defense systems, the government has to express political will in the form of an order that says, we want to purchase 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition, for example. So this is part of the process of getting organized. President also, you probably may have noticed, a few weeks ago, he hosted the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of South Korea at Camp David. That was a big deal. I mean, it didn't get a lot of headlines, but the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of South Korea don't normally hang out with each other very much. So for the President to get those two to come to Camp David was a huge deal. And this is part of us building relationships with partners in the Indo-Pacific region, because the United States, even with the biggest defense budget in history, does not have the capability or the capacity to deal with all the different issues that are out there. So that's why the President is working hard to reestablish these relationships. On Friday, he's hosting the APEC, which is the collection of nations from the Pacific region, strengthening, rebuilding that trust and those relationships, because obviously they are all under pressure. You see that there are 2 carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. One of them is going to go through the Suez and around to the Gulf. I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, but you know, the U.S. has 11 carrier strike groups, but at any one time, 5 of them are in maintenance. And these are nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, so they will be underway for a couple of years, and then they go to Norfolk or wherever their home base is and spend time going through maintenance. So we actually only have 5 at a time. And so yeah, that's more than Hungary or Switzerland perhaps, but nonetheless, 5 aircraft carriers to address all the different challenges in the world. So the fact that the United States has put 2 there to help send a signal to Iran that do not make the terrible mistake of thinking you can escalate this conflict beyond what it is right now. And there's also what we call a Marine Expeditionary Unit that is afloat in the Eastern Mediterranean. Their job is to be prepared to help with evacuation of civilians should that be required in Israel, Lebanon, or something like that. This is expensive. It's very expensive. And in fact, the reason there are 2 carrier strike groups in the region is because one of them was extended. It was supposed to be coming home. But the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, said, not so fast. So you can imagine 5,000 sailors and 5,000 families are not thrilled. There was a story that came out last week when the decision was made to extend them. It's a tradition in the Navy that if you're about to get really bad news, they always serve steak and lobster in the mess. And so that's what was served, and so everywhere, everybody figured out, oh my goodness, this is not going to be good. And so they're getting a couple of extra months on their tour. Before I switch and talk briefly about what I think is happening in Ukraine and then what specifically is happening in Israel, hanging over all of this from an American perspective is our political situation. We have an election November next year. Okay, of course, campaigns have already been underway for months. We have this very long process. Millions and millions and millions of dollars will be spent, and we'll vote for a president, 435 members of Congress, and 1/3 of the senators November next year. People are worried. I hear it all the time. I live in Frankfurt, so oh my God, what if Trump comes back? Yeah, it's a possibility. I don't think it's going to happen, but that doesn't mean anything to you or to me. The fact is, people have to get out and vote. You know, if you don't like what's happening, you have to show up on election day and vote. And young people, in particular, are going to have to vote. We saw what happened in Poland. You know, Poland, I think, was going in an unfortunate direction until young people got involved, and you can see what can happen at the ballot box. Now, by the way, I may offend some of you tonight. I don't intend to offend you, but I owe you the respect of being honest and giving you my assessment. But I will always welcome the challenge. I think that in the very near term, of course, this November, you know, our government will have a shutdown on 17 November if the new speaker is not able to get another continuing resolution passed. And so there won't be any support for Israel, Ukraine, or anybody if the government shuts down. Because what happened under the previous speaker, you know, only bought time until the middle of November. So that's at the top of the to-do list, is to make sure the government keeps functioning. And we have a very small group of extremists that are able to, because the Congress is divided by only 4 or 5 votes, a small number of extremists are able to hold the whole thing hostage. So unless people discover their backbone and do their duty, instead of focusing entirely on staying in power. But I don't have an opinion about that. Okay, I know you're tired of looking at my picture here. My European friends always love it when an American talks to them about European geography and European history, but I have discovered that actually most Europeans don't know their geography or their actual history, only what they heard, that this was always fill in the blank, whatever it was. So I love maps. My son thinks the whole world fits in his hand and his iPhone. That does not help me in thinking geostrategically. So I like maps. And by the way, walking here tonight, Alex and I, we walked past this incredible map store on Rämistrasse. I'm going to park there tomorrow for about an hour and buy everything that we can carry. It looked like a really good store. You see the way this map is. This is a typical map that you would find in a European headquarters in NATO. Turkey, the Black Sea, are in the bottom right-hand corner of the map. The top part of Norway is cut off. Right? I asked when I was still in the Army, I asked the Norwegian Army Chief, Odin Johansen, of course his name is Odin. I said, Odin, what is the most important part of Norway? And he said, the part that's always cut off on your map. It's that top 5% of Norway that if the Russians ever were able to get control of it, it would change. See if this red dot will show up. It will change up here. Doesn't quite show up. it's called the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. That's when the old days, Soviet subs would come out of the north and head into the Atlantic. They had to go between Greenland, Iceland, and UK. So for NATO navies, this was always extremely important. And so if the Russians got control of that part of Norway, they would be in a position to change the geography with anti-ship systems, air defense systems, long-range weapons. They could change things in the North Atlantic. So for Norway, most of their military is actually in that very top 10%. But in Turkey and the Black Sea, of course, so much of it is down in the bottom right-hand corner. I went to Ankara once. I had breakfast with the J5. The J5 in anybody's staff is always the most important person. That's the officer that's in charge of plans, policy, setting priorities from a staff position. So I had a working breakfast with him, and this was when I was stationed at Izmir, Turkey. And Izmir is on the very southern part of Turkey, there on the Aegean. That was NATO's Allied Land Command headquarters. But I went up to Ankara, had breakfast. I said, "Sir, how's it going this morning?" He said, "Ben, I wake up in the morning. I have Russia to the north, Iran, Iraq, Syria to the south, the Caucasus to the east, and the Balkans to the west. It's a hell of a neighborhood." And I kind of laughed, and then I realized, Turkey's not in the bottom right-hand corner of his map. He's right in the middle of the map. So where you see yourself on the map affects how you think strategically. I mean, obviously. But in the U.S., the way we organize ourselves around the world is we divide the world up into regional commands. So, of course, today we are sitting inside U.S. European Command. That's for our purposes, for which commander is responsible for military things and relationships and training and readiness. U.S. Central, and EUCOM is located in Stuttgart. CENTCOM, U.S. Central Command, which is located in Tampa, is the headquarters responsible for the Middle East. Right? And they've been responsible for fighting Afghanistan, Iraq, all the things that are happening now in Israel, Syria, Iran, etc. That's U.S. Central Command. The boundary between U.S. European Command, which is responsible for Turkey, and U.S. Central Command, responsible for the Middle East, is the border between Turkey and Syria. Now, there's no great place to put it, but the point is you've got two different commands that are thinking about Turkey and the Black Sea in completely different perspectives. And that's what has caused us, I think, to make terrible decisions about supporting the YPG, which is an arm of the PKK, which is a Kurdish terrorist organization. Now, the reason we did that was because Central Command was prima inter pares of all the commands, and they said, "Hey, we got to kill ISIS." The president said ISIS is a threat, and the YPG of the PKK, the Kurdish terrorist organization, they're the best at killing ISIS. So we were giving weapons. It was a policy decision to give weapons to YPG for a tactical benefit, and the price we paid was enormous with a NATO ally, a strategic partner that absolutely does not trust us right now. Now, I want to be very clear. I absolutely do not excuse or am not willing to accept the terrible decisions that our Turkish ally makes. President Erdogan, Turkey's one of the 2 or 3 worst places on the planet to be a journalist. But the fact is, that map is not going to change. And I don't even want to think about NATO without Turkey versus, every now and then people say, why are they even in NATO? Well, I think there were a lot of Germans who were asking, why is the U.S. in NATO when Donald Trump was our president? So I think you can't make emotional decisions about who's in the alliance or who's in the union or whatever based because you don't really like the person in charge at the time. That map doesn't change. And so if you're trying to think strategically, where do you need allies? Now, when you look at the Black Sea there, we have not thought strategically about the Black Sea in a very long time. But Catherine the Great, she annexed Crimea 1787 because she was tired of the Ottomans raiding the Russian coastline of the Black Sea. So she needed the Crimean Peninsula to protect Russia. So when somebody says, come on, Crimea was always Russia, let them have it. I don't think that's how it works. The Tatars, Crimean Tatars would say, oh, we've been here about 1,000 years. The Greeks would say, oh, we were there before you. And so that's not a good reason to let Russia have Crimea because it was always theirs, because it wasn't always theirs. And in fact, Russia has agreed multiple times in different venues and different documents acknowledging that Crimea belonged to Ukraine. Okay? Now somebody says, yeah, but Yeltsin was drunk when he did that. That's not a very compelling argument. So the fact is, the world and Russia acknowledge that Crimea is sovereign territory of Ukraine, but you can see why it's important. Now, I'm going to show you a detailed map, and then I'm going to back out of it in a second, okay? Because when I talk about Crimea, you have to think, why don't we just let the Russians have it? I mean, for the sake of peace. And I hear a lot of really good, well-educated people say, let them have Crimea for the sake of peace. Okay, well, I would tell my German friends, well, for the sake of peace, I mean, come on, let them have Bavaria. You know, only the Bavarians would argue with that. Actually, they might be in favor of that, but or you know, pick your country and say, for the sake of peace, let them have it. That was the 18th century, the 19th century, when the big powers kind of divided up the world for what they wanted. But in 2023, that's not how it works. You know, we had a terrible world war and created an international rules-based order that included respect for sovereignty and for nations to be able to make their own choices. Okay, so Crimea is about the size of Massachusetts, almost to the square meter. It's a very, very small place. There's no mysteries about where it is. But when you look on this map, particularly on the bottom left-hand map, okay, you see Crimea at the bottom, Sevastopol, and then this part that's red that goes up through Tokmak, Mariupol, Donetsk, Luhansk. After 9 years, this war actually started in 2014, 9 years ago. After 9 years, Russia, with all the advantages they had, that's all they control. Okay? Crimea is the decisive terrain of this war. If Ukraine is able to liberate Crimea, there's no reason for Russia to even stay in Donetsk and Luhansk. They don't care about those places, except that provides them land access, the so-called land bridge that runs from Rostov down along the Crimea. Because as you know, the only other way you can get to Crimea over land is over the famous Kerch Bridge, which is right here. The Sea of Azov, that's not international water, that's inland water agreed between Ukraine and Russia. But when Russia built this famous Kerch Bridge here, of course, it made it extremely difficult for ships to come up into Mariupol. Berdansk is about right here. Those are the two main seaports on Azov Sea. They're worthless now. In fact, both of them, Mariupol, you've seen the video yourself, totally destroyed. Okay? So for Ukraine to give up Crimea means you can forget two of their most important ports. You can forget going in and out of Azov Sea because it'll be forever controlled by the Russians. And then you have three other main ports, Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Kherson, which is about right here. Kakhovka, that's where the dam was destroyed by the Russians. And the Black Sea is going to be suffering from the ecological damage of that for a long time to come. So you've got three other ports here that are necessary for Ukraine to export grain and normal commerce. They can't do it with any sort of guarantee as long as Russia occupies Crimea. So the idea that Ukraine would say, okay, for the sake of peace, we're going to stop and we're going to let Russia have Crimea, that only guarantees a continuation of the conflict. I spoke with at the Munich Security Conference, I spoke with a very senior, very senior investment executive, and he said that there's no way their organization would be providing money for the rebuilding of Ukraine if it looked like there was going to be a continuation of conflict, if Russia was going to keep doing what they're doing. So, not just from a humanitarian standpoint, but from a practical business standpoint, the millions of Ukrainian refugees that are in Germany and Poland and other European countries, they have nothing to which they can go back if Ukraine is not able to rebuild. And they're not going to be able to rebuild as long as Russia occupies Crimea. Now, these rings, what this is meant to show the different type of weapon systems that are needed. If you agree with Ukraine that the decisive terrain is Crimea, then how do you liberate it? How do you get it back from the Russians? I hear all the time, well, there's no way you can get it from the Russians. I would disagree. What makes Crimea special, of course, is Sevastopol. Here, that's the home of the Black Sea Fleet. And if you look at, if they had the German Taurus, for example, with a 500-kilometer range, all of Crimea would be within range. From Odessa to Sevastopol is 300 kilometers. That's the range of the U.S. ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System. I wish I had thought of that acronym myself, but 300 kilometers. So in other words, every critical part of Crimea is easily within range of GPS precision-guided weapons. And what you saw a few weeks ago is a very sophisticated multi-domain operation. Multi-domain is what NATO does. It means land, sea, air, cyber, space. You integrate the effects in each of those domains to get the objective that you want. And in this case, the Ukrainian counteroffensive is a multi-domain operation designed to liberate Crimea. So what we see in the trenches, the minefields, all of that, that is only the land part of this counteroffensive. It's terrible fighting. It is going to continue being very hard, especially since we, the West and the U.S., waited so long to provide the Ukrainians. I mean, we've been making decisions very incrementally because despite all the good stuff my president has done and our Congress has done, we failed on the most important task, which is to clearly define the objective. What is the purpose? It's so important. We've already spent $60 billion there. What is it? Mr. President, tell us what's the objective. Of course, the objective should be help Ukraine win. Use the W word, win. Defeat Russia. Eject them back to the 1991 borders. Help get these thousands of Ukrainian children back that have been deported, get them back home. Hold Russians accountable for the thousands of war crimes. Come up with a security arrangement for Ukraine and then help rebuild Ukraine. That's what win looks like. That could have been done this summer. For sure it could be done next summer, but it will take the United States and Germany to say, we want Ukraine to win. It's our policy. Why don't they do that? I mean, why isn't that our policy? To me, it's such an obvious good thing for everybody in this room. If Russia is defeated, this is about this international rules-based order from which all of us have benefited. American prosperity depends on European prosperity, and European prosperity depends, Europe, our biggest trading partner, not China, Europe. So American prosperity, even people live in Iowa, Texas, Oregon, Georgia, depends on a prosperous Europe. And a prosperous Europe depends on stability and security in Europe. I was in UK last week, talking to a member of parliament there. He said food prices in UK are up 19%, specifically because of Russia's disruption of grain shipments coming out of Ukraine. That's a direct impact on people that think Ukraine is some regional border dispute. Direct impact, disruption of energy, disruption of so many other rare earth materials that all of us depend on. That's why this matters. And the president, our leaders, the Bundeskanzler, needs to say, this is why it's important. And I think most people, if leaders speak to their population as if they were adults, it's like, okay, you get enough people to go along with it. But it takes the leader to have a vision and to be able to say it. So, am I happy with the pace of the counteroffensive? Am I disappointed? Yes. I get reminded all the time, Hodges, you promised, you said this was going to happen. I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong. For sure. I really did expect that the administration by now would have said, would have come to the conclusion that we need Ukraine to win. Now, maybe in Q&A we could talk about, what are the reasons that they haven't said that. Obviously, there's a fear of escalation. I think there's also a fear of what happens if Ukraine wins. What do we do if the Federation collapses? What are the impacts? Well, these are real concerns. Now, as if that's not enough to keep you excited, I love this little map because there's nowhere to hide. I mean, if you have an ATACMS or a Storm Shadow, that's why the Black Sea Fleet is moving. You had commando or special forces in rubber boats, destroyed radar on the west side of Crimea, and then you have drones and Storm Shadow provided by UK hits the maintenance facility in Sevastopol. That's brilliant. I mean, that's it's not very sexy destroying a big maintenance facility, unless that's the only dry dock for the entire Black Sea Fleet. They can't stay there. And then 2 days later, they hit the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. And there were stories, the admiral was killed. No, that doesn't mean anything. You can replace generals and admirals very quickly. It's 30 staff officers that were lost. That's hard to replace. And so that's why the Black Sea Fleet is beginning to reposition further to the east. That's part of the counteroffensive. That's what we're after. All right, here we go. I imagine all of you have been brushing up on your Middle Eastern geography here over the last few weeks. I'm embarrassed to tell you, I had no idea how large the West Bank was, and when you look at it on the map and you combine the West Bank and Gaza Strip together, I mean, what a significant portion of Israel it is, right, in terms of area. And then, of course, the population, trying to figure out, okay, there's 7-8 million Israelis. There's about 5 million Palestinians between West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip. You could understand why Israelis would be anxious about a permanent Palestinian state right in the middle of there. And so you can also see why leaders from around the world have tried for decades to come up with a solution where these people are not trying to kill each other all the time. So what happened? What is going on there right now? Or give you a second to orient your eyes to the map. Of course, on the map on the left, you can see the Gaza Strip there in the southwestern corner of Israel. And the map on the right is a blow-up of the Gaza Strip. So almost 2.2 million people living in Gaza Strip, which is about the same size as a mid-sized American city. It's packed and densely populated, as we've all have learned over the last few days. So what is the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, what are they doing? I think media has been talking about, when's the big invasion? When's it going to happen? Well, it started several days ago. It was not going to be like the kickoff of a football match. It was going to be infiltration because the Israelis are under enormous pressure, number one, to limit civilian casualties. It doesn't look like it on TV when you see artillery hitting and airstrikes hitting all the time, but at least for the ground forces going in, I think the decision was to send them in a way that reduces their exposure to casualties themselves and is a much slower, more methodical approach to eliminating Hamas. But when I heard Prime Minister Netanyahu talk about the mission is to destroy Hamas, I thought, well, that's impossible. You can't kill enough Hamas fighters to destroy Hamas because Hamas is a movement. It's not. I'm not confused about how evil they are, but it's not, you can't just kill them all. If you're serious about defeating Hamas, you have to figure out what is the root cause. Why is there a Hamas? And also you have to isolate, like with any insurgency, you have to isolate them from external support. Where does the money come from? Where does the ammunition come from? It's incredible amounts of sophisticated weapons that they have been using against Israel. I mean, And it looks to me that these guys are very well trained. And of course, the famous tunnel system that's under there, that's not a couple of guys with a can. I mean, this is industrial construction of an underground system. So unless you can isolate all that, you're not going to destroy it. So I think that the government, the Israeli government, has got to figure out a way to, there's no elegant way to say this, they got to figure out a way to kill enough Hamas, destroy enough of their infrastructure to satisfy a domestic demand, but it has to be done in concert with some sort of political solution. I mean, if U.S. policy, you know, is a two-state solution, rolls off the tongue, sounds wonderful, there's a reason we don't have it yet, because on both sides, you've got people that don't necessarily want it. Even though to outsiders, it seems like such an obvious thing. I mean, can't you guys, you both, Palestinians and Israelis, have legitimate claims to this land, finding a solution that addresses the legitimate demands of both sides and done in a way that they can live with each other. But you know, you've had an Israeli prime minister who was assassinated by his own people for trying too hard on that. You've had others on the other side, the Palestinian side, that have paid the price. It is going to require not only courageous Palestinian and Israeli leaders, but it's going to require the United States and countries like Switzerland, Germany, France, Italy to put big pressure on all of those who don't want it. I'm sure in my heart that Prime Minister Netanyahu has no interest in a two-state solution. I mean, the Israelis, you know, it's always hard to talk about these particular subjects. I mean, it's electric right now. But the Israelis bear responsibility also. They've got almost 400,000 people living in illegal settlements in the West Bank. It's unjustifiable. You can't, and it makes it very hard for countries like the United States and others who want to support and who are committed to supporting Israel. At the same time, they are continuously breaking agreements. And of course, the Israelis that are in these settlements treat Palestinians terribly. I mean, there's serious violence that goes on there. So this is a real problem. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is under huge pressure right now from his own population because of what was going on before October the 7th. And then, of course, the surprise that happened on October 7th is the idea of Israeli invincibility has really been jolted as a shock, and I think a lot of people feel betrayed. And so I don't imagine that Prime Minister Netanyahu will be around a long time after this. I don't know that. But there's going to have to be pressure from all of us to come up with a solution. We can't keep living like this. I mean, the Israelis are no safer, or certainly not safer now than they would be if there was a two-state solution. All right. I would commend to you, pay attention to what the government decides is their end state. What is the Israeli government end state? If I'm a colonel or a captain in the Israeli Defense Force, right now I'm focused on my mission, trying to keep my guys alive. We're looking for Hamas. We're trying to find these 200 plus hostages whose life is under huge risk right now. But I've got journalists here, I've got lawyers here, making sure I don't kill somebody that shouldn't be killed, but yet I'm fighting somebody that's shooting at me from inside a mosque or coming up out of the ground behind me. Very difficult for a young man or a young woman to be effective in that. And I want to know, what is the end state, Prime Minister? What are we supposed to do? How far do we go? Is there a plan for governance of Gaza? If it's put in place by Israel, that's not going to work. So there's going to be some kind of external agreement that leads to implementation of some sort of a ceasefire at some point with governance that would be respected over Gaza. Israel does not want to stay there and occupy. They were there before they left in 2005. It's too expensive, it's too dangerous. You never solve it that way. So we've got to come up with a political solution. And I think that's my last point. before I take questions, is that it's too easy to turn to a military solution. Send that carrier over there, send the airborne over here, launch jets over there, use drones, strike that target. Right? Sounds pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of clean, but for what? For what purpose? And every soldier, sailor, airman I know, we know this construct called DIME, diplomacy, information, military, economics. Those are the four main pillars of power for any nation or for any coalition. DIME. Every soldier I know wants to see capital D, capital I, little m, capital E. Now, like Frederick the Great said, diplomacy without weapons is like an orchestra without instruments. Of course, you have to have some sort of power, whether it's financial power or military power, to back up your diplomacy. But we'd much rather see our diplomats solving things, our governments using economic tools to solve things before you put soldiers in there and say, please solve my problem. And I want to know, okay, well, what is it supposed to look like at the end? 20 years in Afghanistan, we only had a clear objective the first year, and then we spent 19 years trying to figure out, policies. And $2 trillion later and thousands of dead people later, we left. That was a disaster because we never had a clear objective. Okay, sure, I look forward to questions.
General Hodges, and it was a brilliant overview, mentioning all the hotspots and the problems and possible hope, but also was a lot of questions how it ever could be achieved. Now we immediately plunge into the question session, and sir, your first question over there.
Can you clearly hear me?
We have a microphone for you.
And a strong voice as well.
Yeah.
So speak slowly.
No doubt about that.
Yes, thank you very much. The question I would ask you is to maybe, through your perspective, help us understand why the West, after spending 20 years trying to bring Russia into sort of the Western economic capitalistic system, which clearly had huge benefits for the Russian economy, Russian business, and especially also sort of the Russian oligarchs, who hugely benefited from whatever happened in those 20 years, and all of a sudden it's been turned around. Can you help us understand what Putin is thinking and where he wants to go from here? Because I clearly have a hard time understanding it.
We too.
So I think that we in the West were naive. I remember how happy I was when the Cold War ended. Germany was reunified. I had started as a very young officer a very long time ago in 1981 in West Germany, and so to see the end of the Cold War and reunification was fantastic. I mean, it was great. And then we had Russian troops with us in Bosnia in 1995, 1996, when the NATO implementation force went in to implement the Dayton Peace Accord. It's like, this is going to work. We were incredibly naive. We were not prepared. I think almost everybody, including the CIA and other intelligence agencies, were astounded when the Soviet Union collapsed. So we were not prepared for what it might look like when it collapsed. We just assumed, well, it'll be democratic, it'll be capitalistic, what could possibly go wrong? But of course in Russia, they have none of the institutions necessary for a democratic society or even normal capitalism that you would recognize to succeed. But none of those things existed. And so when American companies and European companies started pouring tons of money in there to get a foothold, of course, there was none of the things that we take for granted about transparency and rules about where the money goes and who gets it and all of that. And so that's a long way of saying that I think we were naive. President Putin he's pretty clear about what he thinks. I mean, he likes to talk about being the cornered rat when he was a kid and all of that. And you think about where he was at the end of the Cold War. He was a KGB, he's always described as this KGB agent, makes it sound like, him and James Bond and doing all that kind of thing. He was an admin guy, but nonetheless, he was KGB and was in Dresden, and what he saw was his country losing. He hated it, which is completely understandable. And so as he worked his way up through the power structure after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think he decided that, not only as he said at Munich, I think that this was the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century, the collapse of the Soviet Union. He wanted to reverse that. And I really do think he's not crazy. He's not crazy. He's not Nero that is willing to burn the whole thing down. But I think he absolutely believes, as if this was the 18th century, that Russia is entitled to control countries all around them, make decisions for them. And he does not care a whit about Russian people unless they are in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And he has overseen the deaths of tens of thousands of people under his order. And inside Russia, there will be no Arab Spring inside Russia. That's not in their culture. I think over the centuries of the very centrally authorized authoritarian system, the apparatus that's in the interior security apparatus, Navalny, all these others, anybody that raises their head up and wants to protest is either killed or goes to jail immediately and gets their skulls crushed. So I just don't see something changing from the inside either. And I think he sees Russia as it is a great country, by the way. It's just a shame that the people inside Russia suffer as much from their leadership as people on their border. And I think for him, the nuclear weapons that they possess, that's in the fabric of Russian greatness, is their nuclear weapons. And that's how they think about things, is the threat of force. They absolutely, I see zero evidence that they respect anything but somebody that's willing to push back, fight back.
Absolutely. There's, by the way, an interesting book by Catherine Belton about Putin's network. It's worth to read it, and she will be eventually a speaker at the CF2 if she's not too much afraid to go public because she's menaced by this regime. Next question, please. Two over there.
Oh, is this on? Yeah. So I just have pivoting to China again. Not sure that you want to talk too much about it, but I just wanted to ask about Taiwan. Of course, America, as of recently, has decided that it will publicly say that it's going to defend Taiwan if China invades. I don't know if that's a good idea or not. I don't know if that's possible or not, and I just wanted to ask you, is it possible for some American-led coalition to defend Taiwan in case of an invasion? Is it possible for Taiwan to defend itself without America? And how long into the future would that be possible? And what would it take if it's not possible, like more anti-ship missiles? I hear Taiwan's trying to build a better navy. It seems a little silly to me. Things like that, like what would it take to defend Taiwan specifically?
So I think that the threat of China invading Taiwan right now is low, but in probably 3 or 4 years, China will be in a much stronger position militarily to do that. I think that President Xi, that's on his calendar, on his to-do list, that probably, his third term ends in about 4 years from now. He's openly told his military, be ready to do that. I think that their military right now is not ready to do that. to invade Taiwan would not be like, the Allies going across the English Channel to Normandy. Is a significant difference. The risk for the Chinese would be very high, but more importantly, economically. I think of course they would like to have Taiwan to get that sorted, and the capacity of the Taiwanese to produce microchips, and that's important for them. But I think right now they know that the price that they would pay economically would undo any progress they've made over the last several years. And I think that the United States, working with allies, has taken appropriate economic measures to, number one, protect ourselves, to develop other places where you can get chips, for example, but also to build up diplomatic, economic, and military relationships that would make it very difficult for China to do this. I don't think the Chinese want to do it. I mean, President Xi, like I said, the military's not ready. Economically, they're not ready for it. They have some serious issues themselves inside China. But they're watching to see our capabilities, our capacity, the collective West. Are we really serious about freedom of navigation? Last week, or about maybe 10 days ago, a Chinese Navy ship rammed a ship of the Navy of the Philippines that was out near these contested islands that Philippines has claimed, but China would like to have. They rammed the ship. Of course, they know that the United States has treaty obligations with the Philippines, and then you had a Chinese aircraft came within about 10 feet of a U.S. B-52 bomber in international airspace. I'm not a pilot, but even I know that seems kind of dangerous. So these are unprofessional, high-risk things that are being done to challenge. And so the United States is going to work with UK, of course, but Japan, South Korea, Australia, India increasingly, the Philippines. I can imagine we will continue to work harder with Vietnam to have a network of friends that can resist Chinese economic pressure, but also are prepared militarily if required. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I made professionally in my life was I grossly overestimated Russian military capability. I mean, I was focused on their modernization effort and all the stuff they were buying and how big they were and how fast they could move. And I missed the impact and the negative consequences of deep corruption throughout the Russian military and the Ministry of Defense, but also the lack of actual training and real operational experience. I missed all that. So that's what I'm looking for on the Chinese side now. I think they have 2 aircraft carriers now. But there's a gigantic difference between having a lot of ships and having a really good Navy. I mean, it's about the quality of people, it's about the readiness levels, the maintenance, all of that. I can't tell yet that the Chinese are where they need to be to take on the Royal Navy, the U.S. Navy, and the rest.
But definitely more discipline. Okay, there was another question in this corner.
Yeah, but you almost have answered it, because you said you overestimate the capabilities of the Russian army. And that is a question I was interested when we saw this. I mean, we get all this news, how the conflict developed, in terms of not the technology, but the human capabilities of an army. There must have been a time when you had contact to Russian colleagues. And, in my job, I would say I had contact to American, French, anybody. And so you make up your mind, where are they? And you probably say, okay, actually these guys are as sophisticated as I am, or most of my colleagues. I understand from what you say, that is not the case. You overestimated their human capabilities in terms of leadership, organizational skills, and make that army run or whatever.
So what I missed was the lack of actual operational experience they had. I saw, okay, they were in Syria, they went into Crimea in 2014, they were in Africa, and so I thought, okay, well, they must have a lot of experience. I did not realize at the time that in the Russian system that conscripts cannot go outside of Russia. And most of the army are conscripts. So it was actually a very thin slice of the Russian military that it was the same people doing all the different operations, the airborne, the BDV, and their Wagner and the other private military companies, the mercenaries. So when you saw that famous convoy of 40 miles long trucks, I mean, something that even a new lieutenant would never do, this is what you get when you have no experience, and you don't have a corps of sergeants that make people do the right things. And of course, in the Russian system, you make mistakes or you complain or speak out, you don't get promoted. So to be promoted, you can never make a mistake. And the only way to never make a mistake is to never do anything except exactly what you are told. That's how you end up with the performance that we saw. You know, today it's been, February, 21 months since this started, the large-scale invasion started, February last year. Not one convoy or train bringing ammunition and equipment from Poland into Ukraine has been destroyed. Not one. How can that be? I mean, there's no mystery where the railroads are, where the highways are. And it's because the Russian Air Force, which has a huge advantage over the Ukrainian Air Force in terms of numbers and modern aircraft, never trained to learn how to achieve air superiority, which is job one for all of us, all of our air forces. They never trained how to do that, and they didn't have the experience of it. Flying in Syria is a big difference from flying over Ukraine. And so because they failed to achieve air superiority, they cannot have aircraft loitering, waiting for a train to come along or convoys to come along. That is an incredible failure by Russian Air Force, and after 2 years, they still haven't figured out how to do it. The Great Black Sea Fleet, which has a really cool name, is having to move, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. Ukraine has achieved that through drones, maritime drones, anti-ship missiles, sabotage, and so until the Russians change culture, they will continue to be reliant on mass. What somebody I read today, somebody called it a big red blob. But it's a big red blob. And the fact that they don't care how many casualties they have. You know, this week they passed the 300,000 mark killed. Over half of their tanks have been destroyed. So now you've got tanks that are older than me, which is considerable, are being pulled out of storage to be used. And that's the advantage that they have in this kind of a conflict, is that they're willing to continue pushing bodies into the meat grinder, and they'll find ways to replace some of the lost equipment. Sanctions help, of course, that they cannot replace quality on precision weapons, but the only way you can undermine that mass is to destroy their artillery, destroy their headquarters, make Crimea untenable so that the Air Force and the Navy have to leave.
Next question, please. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Wow, that's good. Okay, here. Maybe the questions could be to the point, and the answers also will be slightly short.
So we've just been talking about the degradation of Russian military power and its ability to project. This will, of course, have massive consequences with all these frozen conflicts. Abkhazia, Transnistria, South Ossetia, and we've seen already they're unable to protect actually one of their major allies, Armenia. Nagorno-Karabakh fell, although their Russian peacekeeping troops, they were unable really to freeze that conflict. What's the end game now with these frozen conflicts? Would you like to speculate on this, please?
You know, it's a great question. The potential for some of these to reverse themselves is there if we are willing to think strategically about now is the chance. If we help Ukraine actually win, that could lead to a change in the government in the Russian Federation. Now look, I'm saying this as an American, where we have a not a very good record of regime change. And so I don't advocate for regime change, because it never turns out the way you think it will. It has never turned out the way we thought it would. But I am a big fan of planning for what if. If it does happen, what happens to nuclear weapons? What about the millions of refugees that'll be coming, the disruption of other things? And so when you think about Chechnya, for example, I mean, there's been two very, very bad Chechen wars, where the Chechens say, okay, the Russian military is not quite what it used to be. The Chechens see themselves as one of the best parts of the Russian military anyway. Does that break away? I don't see it happening in Georgia, unfortunately. I was in Tbilisi about 2 months ago, and the Russian control there is worse now than it was even a couple of years ago. There's over 100,000 Russian military-age males that are hiding there to avoid conscription and going to Ukraine, but they're everywhere, all over Georgia. And the Georgia Dream Party, which is the ruling party, is completely, in my view, under the control of the Kremlin. In fact, the Russians are now planning to expand a seaport in Abkhazia on the eastern Black Sea coast, because they're having to move out of Crimea, at least tentatively. Transnistria, that's a different story. I think Transnistria, that little piece between Moldova and Ukraine, that seems more, seems closer to perhaps changing things there. But it really all depends on Ukraine, what happens with Ukraine. If they're successful, I think that could unleash a lot of different things.
Two questions over there.
Thank you for your insights, very interesting. So my question is, looking at the melting support for Ukraine, the massive losses in Ukraine, how realistic is it that Russia can be defeated? And if you talk about Hamas, you say even Hamas can't be defeated. So what could be the alternative? If the weapons, if they continue, what would be the price everybody pays?
That's an excellent question, and I think this is the question that the White House has discussed every day, as well as in other capitals that want to see Ukraine succeed. If you talk to, when I talk to Ukrainians, or I listen to what President Zelensky says and others, of course, they say there's no way we can stop. We see what happens in a Ukrainian village that's occupied by the Russians. So they're under no illusions what happens if they stop or if they fail. So even without aid from the United States and other countries at the current levels, I don't see them being willing to stop. Now, is it realistic to expect that Ukraine can defeat Russia? I would not stand here and tell you it was realistic if I didn't believe it. But I'm also, in addition to being a super optimistic person, I'm also a realist. And you can't defeat Russia just with being the good guys. We do know that from history that war is a test of will and a test of logistics. Clearly, Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian people have superior will to Russian soldiers and Russian people, but do Washington, Berlin, London, Paris have superior will to the Kremlin? I'm not sure. The fact that my president still cannot say it's our policy that Ukraine wins. We want Ukraine to win. When they say that, then everything that's needed gets provided. There's none of this nonsense about, well, Abrams tank burns too much gas, I heard so much criticism of the Abrams tank by the Pentagon, like, well, why the hell do we have 4,000 of them? But it was because they didn't want to commit to provide them. And then they had this huge argument with our German ally about, come on, provide Leos, which they finally did. ATACMS, I've heard multiple reasons why the ATACMS, we shouldn't provide them. None of the reasons are compelling. France and UK provided Scalp and Storm Shadow, and we saw immediately what kind of impact they had. The Black Sea Fleet starts moving. But I think it really boils down to the U.S. administration being overly concerned, and I think it's over concerned about Russian escalation to use a nuclear weapon. Now the president, as the entire universe knows, he's 80 years old, he grew up with a threat from the Soviet Union of nuclear war. So that's a healthy respect. But even during the Cuban Missile Crisis and all the Cold War, you never heard any American president talk about, in such an open way, fear of Russia using a nuclear weapon. In fact, they showed strength and determination to deter it, and Russia respected that. The Soviet Union respected that. Now, we have sent a terrible signal to Pakistan, Iran, North Korea, anybody else that has a nuclear weapon that's thinking or thinks they want to have one, that the United States and all of our allies will deter ourselves just because Russia might use a tactical nuclear weapon. You know, and I'm sensitive when I talk like this because there's another American journal just wants to fire nukes at everybody. That's absolutely not the case. I live in Frankfurt. I'm well within range of everything they have. But I believe that Russia believes President Biden when he said, if you use a nuclear weapon, there will be catastrophic consequences. Which does not mean an American nuclear weapon into Russia, but it would be American firepower destroying Russian assets outside of Russia. Everything in Ukraine, for example. Or maybe they're based in Tartus in Syria. I mean, there will be catastrophic consequences. I think the Russians believe that. President Xi has told the Russians, do not use a nuclear weapon. And then you have to ask, why would they use a nuclear weapon? I mean, where? The Ukrainians have already said, what else can you do to our cities? I mean, that's not going to stop us. So it won't stop the Ukrainians. It won't change the battlefield in any material way because the Russians no longer have the trained and properly equipped forces that could operate in a contaminated environment, which they did have during the Cold War. And then I think that because Putin has wrapped himself in Russia and the idea of Russia as a great nuclear power, and he always talks about using nuclear weapons against NATO if NATO threatens the motherland. That's their doctrine. But he never talks about using a nuclear weapon against Ukraine. And why? So you have to ask, why would he squander what is his most important thing against Ukraine when it won't have the effect that he claims to want to have? And so I've come to the conclusion that the Russians are not likely to use it as long as they see that we deter ourselves. So in effect, their nuclear weapons are most effective when they don't use them. When they use them, then it's over. And I think that the Russian General Staff, which are very professional, they see that. They're like, okay, once you play that, we've got nothing left. And that's why I think it's very unlikely. But, you know, the president literally has the weight of the world on his shoulders. And there are a lot of people around him that believe this is a very real possibility. I think the German Bundeskanzler is very worried about the next American president being Donald Trump, and Trump pulling the U.S. out of NATO. And the Germans, unlike the French and the British, do not have a nuclear weapon of their own. And so if they were somehow got caught up in a conflict with Russia, they could not be sure they would have an American nuclear shield. And so I think that affects how the Bundeskanzler thinks about things as well. I don't agree with him, but I can understand why he might think like that.
Yeah, that's indeed true. Maybe this is the last question because General Hodges will come again, and then we start already at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, General Hodges, for the brilliant talk. My question to you is, to what extent is Western appeasement responsible for the tragic situation we find ourselves in Ukraine? So, can we really be surprised about Russia's large-scale invasion after 2014 with a straight face? You mentioned Georgia being relieved of half of its coast. Putin, of course, has a long history of meddling in Eastern Europe, including the Western Balkans, if you listen to the likes of Timothy Snyder from Yale. Russia wants us to perceive these issues as frozen conflicts. So a lack of assertiveness from the West, I believe, is precisely co-responsible for what we see today. I mean, I came to this country as a refugee from Kosovo, and then I was surprised to find demonstrations against the war, including NATO's intervention to stop the ethnic cleansing of Albanians perpetrated by Serbia. So, German politician Gysi famously said, NATO bombs have not saved the life of a single Albanian. So, there is a perception, I believe, in Western European countries that these issues in Eastern Europe are hopelessly complex and we don't know what to do about them. So in Kosovo too, the Ahtisaari plan was a form of appeasement and it went nowhere. We still don't have a solution to it.
Okay.
So I completely agree with the premise of your question, that this war in Ukraine is what failed deterrence looks like. Now, that happened in many different ways. Starting with Russia's invasion of Georgia, 2008, we did nothing. That doesn't mean that the U.S. or NATO would have to use force automatically. We really did nothing. And Russia demonstrated after, even though they had signed the so-called Sarkozy agreement ending that conflict, they still occupy about 20% of Georgia. They should have been gone years ago. And we've done zero about it. And I think part of the reason the Georgia Dream Party today is where they are is because they realize that the West is not seriously committed to the further Western integration of Georgia. I don't see that changing much anytime soon. And then you come correctly to 2014, Russia invades Ukraine. They annex Crimea, shoot down a airliner that's loaded with Dutch civilians, citizens, and they create this narrative that they're helping separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk who don't want to be a part of Ukraine. Total fairy tale, but we were willing to accept it because, well, you know, Ukraine is so corrupt and we don't care about them. It's so far away. Why should we get involved? And by the way, Russia was always theirs anyhow. I mean, these are the narratives that I heard from extremely well-educated people all over Europe and in parts of the U.S. as well. So we did nothing. And then Russia supported the Assad regime in Syria. President Obama used the famous, you know, if you use chemical weapons on your people, that's a red line. It took them about a day to jump over that red line and use chemical weapons. And of course, we know the story of what happened in Aleppo and other places in Syria. And by the way, literally millions of Syrians began heading towards Europe, trying to get away from the fight. That was not unanticipated by the Russians. This is what General Breedlove, my old boss, the former Supreme Allied Commander, called the weaponization of refugees. And that's what's happening in Africa, where Russia, everywhere, everything that Russia touches generates refugees. Everywhere they go. And where do they come? Yeah, they come here. Because that puts enormous pressure on our relationships between European countries. And of course, it has led to the rise of right-wing extremists in several countries in Europe, including, you know, where we live in Frankfurt there, the AfD had, I think, their best election results ever in Hessen and in Bayern because of that. So these are all part of us not responding firmly to what Russia is doing. And somehow we kept wanting to believe that, come on, you know, this is a modern country. And then I kept hearing, don't worry about Russia. Why would they cut their own throat? I mean, they make so much money selling gas to Europe. Why would they do that? And then I would hear in their economy, it's the size of Italy. I mean, what kind of a threat is that? And we just continue to misunderstand and want to believe this narrative about Russia that they're like us. They're not. They're nothing like us. But Ukraine bears responsibility also. I mean, after 2014, And by the way, the U.S., the Obama administration told the Ukrainians, don't bother defending Crimea. I mean, this will pass or whatever. So they didn't. Now, I don't know how effective they would have been. They were not prepared. And most of the Ukrainian Navy was immediately absorbed by the Russian Navy or destroyed. But we've had this, I think, naive, unsophisticated approach to dealing with Russia. So after 2014, people began to wake up, like, okay, these are bad people, and we've got to do something about it. And so the alliance, the West, gradually increased resistance, started doing things. I was the commander of U.S. Army Europe from November 2014 to December of 2017. In those 3 years, we significantly increased our participation with Ukrainians, helping to train, helping to do things. But still, the U.S. policy was, we can't give them a javelin. That might be provocative to Russia. I mean, that was the height of our strategic thinking about Ukraine. And then the Trump administration comes in, and then all they cared about was Giuliani and Hunter Biden's laptop. And then, so you could imagine the Russians were looking like, well, the Americans don't give a damn about Ukraine. And then they saw the chaos of our withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they rightly could have come to the conclusion that, well, America's a mess right now. There's chaos there. And of course, the worst thing of all, January 6th, and for the first time in our history, we did not have a peaceful transition of power. It happened, but it was not peaceful. The Russians probably thought, well, the U.S. is not going to do anything. Germany was still building Nord Stream 2 late into 2021. So you can almost imagine in the Kremlin, and they're like, well, let's just go ahead and finish the job. Because the West is not going to do anything. They haven't done anything for the last 14 years. And they're so distracted. All of our disinformation stuff is working perfectly, better than they could have hoped for. And so, and Ukraine was not prepared. I was in Kyiv about 2 weeks before this large-scale invasion started. I was with a small delegation of people that were there to convey to the Ukrainians, like, this is really going to happen. I mean, they're coming. You have got to get ready. I can tell you, walking around Kyiv, it did not look like they were getting ready. The first realization, like, well, hell, it really is happening, was when I got a call saying that our Lufthansa flight was leaving 5 hours early, and so you better get downstairs. And so everybody jumped in the car and headed out to the airport, and Lufthansa and KLM had already realized, well, yeah, we cannot stay here anymore. So Ukraine was not really prepared either. So it's a long answer to a very important question. We know 5,000 years of recorded history that if you're serious about preventing war, you have to demonstrate that you're prepared for it.
Civis pacem parabellum, that's absolutely true. And I have to say, as we can learn also from history, wishful thinking is one of the worst diseases, and you get a horrible awakening afterwards. You also mentioned what would be needed: leaders, visions. I don't see even one leader in Europe currently. Okay, this is also the topic for the next conference, but before we go to your gift, we have always a little ceremony of giving a special gift to our speakers. I would like you to present what's coming on. So next week already, the head of the Munich Security Conference. Might be not so an easy time for him. We see what happens. He's the successor of Wolfgang Ischinger, who of course also was at our institute. I hope you all join there too. Then we have at the Zürcher Literaturhaus the American historian Mary Sorotti about NATO enlargement and Russia. She wrote a book about that, an interesting book, and she had a research on lots of documents to look into this phase of the relationships between the West and the East. And finally, President and CEO from World Banking, Mary Ellen Iskandarian, about world banking done by women. Certainly a very good thing, I would say. So this is the fall. Sabine Sura and me, we are already preparing for the spring. And I'm sure it will be also very tempting for you. I always say that, and it sounds maybe a little bit boring as I repeat it, but I'm proud of it. We do it all for you, ladies and gentlemen, and it's free. And you have these wonderful speakers. What else could you have? Thank you, we cherish it, because it's really hard work, I tell you. So, okay, now we learned you have several hobbies, of course, and one is a particularly interesting hobby, if you are correctly informed. You collect memorabilia from battlefields, so from war memorials and stones, I heard, and you put them in a collection of these precious items. I don't know, from the Battle of Cannae till now, you know, it's a full array of interesting items. And as my wife and I every morning have a walk on the Zurich Berg with our dog, we always see also the war memorial of 1799. And in 1799 there was a battle between Napoleon and his revolutionary troops against, already then, the Russians, but there with the help of the Austrians. But finally the French troops under General Massena won, somehow for the benefit also of Switzerland, because it accelerated the processes of democracy even more. And so I took a stone nearby this monument and cleaned it at home. And now if you look at that, you see yourself in full equipment, and the stone is here on the right. It's not that big as you think, it's a little bit smaller, and here is the inscription of, and on the left side is the monument of this famous battle. So I'm sure this is a wonderful collector's item for your collection, and there's plenty of books about that which explain what really happened in detail, but I think it's a pretty nice thing. And the last word I would like to say to you, General Hodges, please come back and advise the Swiss Army to get even more strength to fight what might come. Thank you.